I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited to be having Wes Spencer join us to present the NIST cybersecurity framework. I've had the pleasure of working with Wes for the last year or so, building some content for his platform, Empath. It's a really good platform, really helping educate the entire community. So we're happy to have Wes go over this today. And thank you for joining us for the cyber series that we've been working on all year. So let's look at what's coming up in the cyber series. As soon as I can get my, there we go. So today, as I said, we're doing NIST cybersecurity framework, but we have other presentations coming up throughout the year. Next month, we're going to have CISA present on all the activity that's going on in Washington these days. So that'll be an exciting one because there is a lot going on in Washington. So they'll give us an update on what they're doing and kind of the impact of some of the changes on them and what resources they can bring to bear for MSPs. We're going to do a deep dive into malware and phishing in June. We're going to have a look at the FTC safeguards rule and other financial regulations in July. Then we're going to look at selling cybersecurity. If you can't sell it, why build it? So we're going to look at how you can have that conversation with your client without coming off as a salesperson or a fearmonger. We're going to look at mastering your customer contracts. What are the legal aspects of being an MSP? We'll look at PCI. We'll look at building a security-focused culture, and we'll look at SOC 2, Type 2 audits. And then finally, we'll revisit HIPAA with some of the changes that are coming down the road at the end of the year. So stay tuned. Make sure you come back every month and join us for this cyber series. As I mentioned, we have Wes Spencer joining us today, and again, I've worked with him. He's a wonderful resource, great guy, and really willing to share his knowledge and experience with everybody. I'm not going to steal his thunder and introduce him because he's got plenty to share. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Wes to take this forward. Wes.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much. I'll share my screen out in a second, but first I'm going to force you to listen to me by not sharing my screen out. I'd love to get a little input from y'all. Use chat if you would. Make sure you select everyone. And I want to give you, I just want to know where y'all are at in terms of an understanding around the NIST cybersecurity framework. So 0 has been, I don't even know what NIST stands for. I don't even know what CSF stands for, all the way up to 10, meaning I was on one of the advisory boards to help build the actual NIST CSF. So give me some ranking between 0 and 10. 10 means you wrote the sucker. 0 means you can't spell it. And that's really helpful to me because I want to make sure I'm speaking correctly to my audience. And then also keep in mind, yeah, this is what I thought. So we're getting a whole bunch of ranges from even 8s, which is, I'd say, fairly well experienced, all the way down to 1s. And so I appreciate the honesty on where you're at. What we're really going to do today, and I'm going to share my screen out now. What I really want to do is I want to give you some thoughts around what the cybersecurity framework is. I want to talk a little bit about how you can be using it in your MSP. And I'm going to give you some extra access to resources that I think will be really helpful to you. So just first of all, as an intro to who I am, my name is Wes Spencer. I'm the co-founder of Empath. I'm a cybersecurity nerd, like many of you. I came out of banking. I started a company a few years ago called Perch. Perch was a threat intel and threat sort of digestion type of company that we kind of pivoted in some other things, ended up selling to a bigger company many of you may have heard of called ConnectWise. I stayed on at ConnectWise for a little over a year as their vice president and external chief security officer, basically doing what we're doing today, helping MSPs in their growth journey around cyber. We know cyber is hard. And I know for many of you, if you started your business 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, none of you really even, cyber was an afterthought, right? Cyber was, I've got my firewall, I've got my AVG or Symantec, I've got my mail filtering, like my MX toolbox or MX, whatever it is, and off I go, right? You fast forward to today, not only do you have to do so much more, your clients look to you to be the expert. You're juggling cyber insurance. You have compliance mandates coming down at you left and right from your clients, if not state mandates, if not federal mandates. The whole long list that Mark just gave is significant, isn't it? And so I want to say, I understand where you're at from that perspective. I know how hard it is to be an MSP today. And I know that's just not an easy world to be in. So got the chat open. I should be able to see you guys in chat. If you guys have questions, bring them up live with me. Let's turn it into a discussion. Okay. So also the other thing I want you to keep in mind with this is even if what we're going to talk about today, you're like, dude, Wes, I got this. I'm good. What I want you to do is flip your mentality and say, do my people understand this? All right. I want you to think, do my employees, do they understand what this means and why it matters? Okay. Because it's great for you to know, but if your people don't, then why does it matter? So we're gonna start with this question. Have you ever wondered how to explain just what cybersecurity even is? I mean, isn't that a good question to start with? I'd love to hear in chat. What would you say cybersecurity even is? When a client comes to you and they say, hey, Tom, hey, Corey, hey, Mike, hey, Dan, this cyber thing, I know you've been talking about it. I hear about it on the news, but what exactly is it? Is it just stopping hackers? Is it, like I saw the movie Sneakers back in the 80s? Are we just like protecting, the power grid? Like, what is it? So it's a good question for us to ask. Richard jumping in and saying, being protected from breaches and hacks. Absolutely. Right. And we, of course, want to make sure our clients understand that they're a target. We want to make sure that they understand that a breach is a real deal thing. It's not just something Bank of America goes through, right? Steve is saying business continuity. I love that, right? Making sure that we are talking about how do we keep our business afloat in the midst of bad things happening, right? And so that's a big one. Tom writing in, I wrote a GUI in Visual Basic to track an IP. I love that. Exactly right. How are protecting your most valuable assets, your data from access, corruption, theft, and your people from prurient content. I actually, maybe you're spelling a word I'm not smart enough to know. I don't know, but I'm with you, Howard. Absolutely with you. Making sure that we are protecting the crown jewels of our clients on their behalf, right? Dave, Dave, good to see you on as well, Dave. Reduction of risk against online malicious attacks. Absolutely, Dave. Good to see you sneaking in, my friend. So yeah, those are all really, really great. And so this is where a framework comes into play. Now, there's a lot of frameworks that are out there, right? If you've been following me, you know that I'm a sort of framework agnostic is a good way to say it. There's a lot of really great frameworks that are out there. There are, of course, the NIST cybersecurity framework, which we're going to talk about today. There's the CIS controls. You have the ISO sets of controls. You have industry specific sets of controls. There's a significant amount of security frameworks that are out there. But the NIST cybersecurity framework, I think it holds a place in all of our hearts as something special. It really was one of the very first security frameworks that came out that really took prominence in the United States. And where it came out of was it really came out of 2013. If you remember some of the big incidents that happened in 2011, 2012, notably the big Target incident. If you guys remember, Target stores got popped, and what had happened with them, just quickly, not to go through a deep history lesson, but they ended up getting popped because their HVAC vendor had access into corporate systems for billing. And the bad guy was able to get to Target by getting through the billing system that the HVAC vendor used. And that really I worked at my bank at that time. And that sort of really opened up all of our eyes to, I'm not sure that we're thinking about security the way we need to. And a lot of this, and that wasn't the only driver, but there were several. That caused President Obama to write an executive order to say, I want a nationwide cybersecurity standard. And that's really where the CSF kind of came out of. Do they tell us it's card scammers? Richard, you may be right. My memory does not go back that sharp. That's a job for us to Google and find out. But you may be right. And so when we look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, there's really for the longest time there are 5 functions. We added in the new version 2, a 6th function, which is that governance function. So in the old days, we really only dealt with the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And I'm going to show you how that plays out in time. But recently, just a couple years ago, we released the version 2. And one of the things that version 2 brought into bear is something they probably should have done at the very beginning, but we have to understand cybersecurity in 2013, just something that was a bit of an oversight, which is governance. That governance should really infiltrate, or governance should influence everything else we do, because governance answers the question, how do we know? Right? So let's say we're talking about the protect function. How do we know? Governance jumps into that. Let's say we're talking about recovery and we're looking at recovery plans and recovery exercises. How do we know? So you see how governance is something we're kind of like, oh yeah, that should have already been there. And so think of governance as a way to say, we want to bring influence into each individual major domain with a how do we know? How are we sure what we say is in place? Okay. So a couple more things I'll mention. You see the bullet points here. It's voluntary. There's nobody hanging over your head saying you have to do the CSF. No one's saying that. Now, you may start to see state regulations, you may start to see federal regulations begin to point towards national standards. That opens up a can of worms that I only have the time to open a little and throw at you and then back off. And I'll give you an example of this. Here in Florida, I'm based in Tampa, Florida. We had a House bill, I think it was 430. It might have been it's four something. It ended up getting vetoed. But what it was an introduction. I know Connecticut has had a very similar bill actually passed and some others that basically grant a company safe harbor in the aftermath of an incident if they can prove that they were following a security standard, such as NIST CSF, among others. And so we're starting to see this trend moving forwards of, yes, it's voluntary, but we want some kind of reward mechanism to come in that might grant safe harbor, that might grant some things by someone following it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And also the whole voluntary thing, I come out of banking, and I'll just tell you, in my banking days, one thing I would ask my regulators is, why is it that you guys come up to the line of telling me what to do, but that's where you stop and you say you should have a risk-informed decision according to your size and complexity? You say it over and over and over. And they said, well, Wes, one of the things is regulators, even though we have regulating authority as FDIC, we tend to want to make sure that it's board driven, that's risk influenced, and antitrust is a big deal for us. And so we just want to be careful. And so I'm sorry to belabor this, but that's why largely a lot of this is voluntary to this day. Okay. The goal was to make it easy to understand. What we've learned is it might be easy to understand, but how many of you have tried it and you would agree that this is a little harder to implement than we thought? And one of the reasons for that is because we start getting into the implementation and we say, well, what do you mean by that? You say that I should be doing X, Y, and Z, but like where or what devices or how often? And so there is some ambiguity that comes in some of this. Okay. Steve, maybe a question for later. What impact will the OMB's directives have a few days ago on NIST and MSPs? Is a huge training opportunity. So I'm vaguely familiar with that. I'm going to let you know, Steve, I probably not. I will hold off on that. Maybe Mark, you can come in and answer that question with me later. I'm actually not quite sure the answer to that. I haven't read up on that enough to be comfortable to give you a solid answer. So I'm going to hold, maybe Mark wants to answer in on that, but great question. And then also, a couple other things I want to talk about. It is designed to manage and help us reduce risk, obviously, and give us some pathway that we can use to report on to come back and say, here's where we actually stand. It's not just a framework to say, oh, 0 to 100, we're now at 100 and we're good. It's more of a document to say, this is what good looks like. This is where we want to be, and this is where we're currently at. And here's the pathway to get from where we're at today to where we want to be. And I'll explain some of that in a minute. And then lastly, this is meant to be a living document. No one's coming here telling you this is the final formal, this is the only way to do security, and it'll never change. No one's saying that. Okay. So we talked about the 6 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, with governance really influencing all of them. We've talked about this, but I'm going to dive into that a little bit more in a minute. Now, when you begin to open the cybersecurity framework, what you're going to notice is there's a lot that comes into this, and it's very easy for you to feel overwhelmed. You just want to throw your hands up and be like, what, what do I do? So I'm just going to walk you through. We're not going to go through, this is really the only like guts of CSF we're going to do today, but I just wanted to walk you through a little bit of it. Okay. So in this case, we're looking at the protect function, which is the second one: identify, protect. In this category, we're looking at identity management, authentication, access control. So you kind of described what we're looking at. And then notice that this one has 2 subcategories. Okay. So we have subcategories that belong to a category that belong to a function. And both of those subcategories are statements. So you see the first one: identities are proofed and bound to credentials asserted in interactions. And this is a great example of what I just said before. You're like, what does that mean? What are you exactly asking me to do? What does it mean, proofed and bound to credentials? And who's the one that says, yes, it's been done correctly, or no, it hasn't? You see what I mean? Or the second one, users, devices, and other assets are authenticated. And it gives you some examples with commensurate with the level of risk of the transaction. And you're like, well, what is the level of the risk of the transaction? You see this? So this is where people get stuck, is they come into this and they're like, you didn't give me enough surrounding documentation. You didn't tell me exactly what this means. So what do I do about this? Well, first of all, the last category, one of the things they do is crosswalk over to other references. And so if you really want to dive in deep, you should open these. We should see, what does CIS say about this? Well, this is Control 16. What does COBIT 5 say? I can go reference it, and so on and so forth. Or if you really even want to dive into NIST's actual documentation, they have an 80-page, 120-page documentation called NIST SB 853, which is their overall governance, their risk guidance. So here's what NIST is saying when you look at something like this. They're saying, we're giving you, the best way I can think to say this is the all-in, everything you need, soup to nuts, as deep as you want to go approach. But what you should say as an MSP is this: what's reasonable? What do I need to be doing out of this according to my size, my risk profile, the threat landscape around me? There's a lot that you have freedom to answer this in the way that is applicable to you. Does this make sense? And so this is where people often get stuck, is they see this, and NIST is trying in this overarching document to give you the same, here's maybe a better way to say it is this. Their goal is to say this document should be good enough for Bank of America and good enough for the smallest little flower shop. And that's hard to do, isn't it? Because Bank of America is putting hundreds of millions of dollars into their cyber. The flower shop is putting $0 in. So how do we normalize it? So this is a document written for everybody. And then as we begin to, I think one of the things they realized was, oh my goodness, this works well for the big boys who have time to do this. The smaller companies struggle with this because they come to this and they look at it and they say, well, what exactly, where's the line that it cuts off? Okay, so we're going to expound on that more in just a minute, but I'm just trying to let you know, I'm grabbing your shoulder and I'm telling you, I understand if you tried this before and you got overwhelmed. Okay, so let's move on a little bit further. And what I want to do is I want to talk about each of the main 6 functions themselves, because it's important we have an overall understanding, and an understanding of the purpose of each function actually unlocks for us the ability and the knowledge for us to know why it matters, to explain it to clients, and then when we come across other tools to really help us out pretty significantly. Okay, so first of all, the identify function. What we're really looking at here is this ability for us to understand risk according to what is in our networks, what is in our purview. Okay, so identify starts with sort of the eyeglasses, right? Maybe the microscope and the telescope. The microscope of looking in depth into the smallest of things, the telescope looking into the macro view of all of the things. So one of the things that I would say NIST, CSF, and CIS really kind of start at a foundational level is understanding of your assets. CIS and controls 1, 2, and 3 start with what's your enterprise inventory, which is like your hardware, all that, your software inventory, and then getting into additional things like what's my users and all this. And the reason why this is important is because what this really all comes down to, whether it's the identify function or other frameworks that start with what's in my network, is this: how can I secure what I do not know about, right? I remember my banking days. I got sent a regulator's report of one of our very, very large vendors. Think Fortune 500, think Fortune probably 100 that we did business with. Now, this was decades ago. Let's call it 2013, 2014. All right. And one of the problems the regulators had with this huge business was that not only did they have a pretty significant cyber incident, in the aftermath of that incident, the regulators learned that this large technology provider they were not scanning their networks. They had entire class Cs of networks they had never looked at, never scanned, didn't know what was in them. And the regulator's whole point was, no wonder you had an incident. If you don't know what assets exist, how are you supposed to protect those assets? Right? I mean, that's an obvious question. And so this is why the identify function is dealing with How do we discover our assets? How do we document them? How do we understand things like data flow? How do we have an inventory and build that and know that our inventory is correct? It even gets into policy management. Do you see how this is such a foundational topic we've really got to talk about? And then we shift into the next function, which is the protect function. And in my mind, the protect function really follows the identify function. If I just jump into protection without any identification, how do I know what I'm protecting? Here's an example. Say you walk up to a house and you now buy the house, and it's a super expensive, large house. And you just walk up, you're like, well, how do I protect it? Well, I guess I'll lock the front door. And I think there's a back door. I'm going to go walk up. There it is. Yeah, I'll find it. And okay, I think we're good. And that's it. Well, what happens if we don't know about the windows, the garage door, the whatever it may be? There may be so much more. And so what I'm getting at here is until I've actually assessed what I have, how am I supposed to protect it? And so protection comes in as really identifies a prerequisite to protect. Okay. And so now what we're doing is we're thinking through, now that I know what I have, how do I develop and implement the safeguards necessary to secure things? Right. So building out all the controls necessary to reduce my attack surface, to improve my security hygiene. So this can be things like MFA, like firewalls, like antivirus and anti-malware, EDR, encryption, all of these things. I don't even go through all of them, but you get the idea. So now we're shifting into how do I start to lock that house down? What comes up next after that? Detect. And sorry for the text over there, I didn't realize that. But one of the things about detect that we really need to talk about, there's a philosophy that NIST is trying to get across that I'm not sure we all sometimes see. Why do we have detect following protect? There's an assumption here, isn't there? Here's the assumption. At some point, your security is going to fail. I don't care what a vendor told you. I don't care what they said to get you to buy the product. There's no 100% security. Can I get an amen in chat? There is no 100% for sure security. I wish there was. If there was, I would buy it and you would buy it, right? But at the end of the day, that's not a thing. And so because it's not a thing, there's an assumption that at some point, your prevention is going to fail. It is not a question of if, it is a question of when. Now, this is, first of all, not a defeatist mentality. This does not mean that we give up. This does not mean that we say, well, I'm just not going to do anything because it's going to happen. Oh my goodness, no. We need to be able to do enough and to grant us some benefits. And let me give you some examples of this. What happens if I have the ability to detect that something bad has happened and I can detect that within a short amount of time, I can actually respond and do something with it. So many of you are familiar with the Verizon Data Breach Incident Response Report. Some people call it the DBIR. I prefer to call it that, lost less words. Inside of that, they've talked for years about attacker dwell time, which is this measurement of how long is a bad guy in a network before bad things happen. And wouldn't you know it, oftentimes a bad guy is in the network for weeks, if not months, before something bad happens, which gives us the ability, in theory, to see it and to do something with it. One of the things I've been teaching for years now, and this still holds true in 2025, is that really ransomware in particular is not like push button get ransomware in most cases. In most cases, the bad guy has to get access to the network. They have to establish their credentials. They actually have to get deeper credentials than where they start, which in other words, they start with a foothold and now they're trying to escalate privileges. They need to move laterally through the network and discover what's in the network to understand where they want to hit before they can run ransomware. That's just the world the bad guy's in. Well, are you thinking what I'm thinking? That's an opportunity for you. See, we have this idea in this world, this unfortunate idea that goes like this. People say, well, I'm facing Russia and Ukraine and North Korea and Syria and Vietnam and China. I'm never going to be able to stop those bad guys. Of course you're not. We all know that. But that's not the question. The question is, can I see it before something really bad happens and do something about it? See, here's the thing. Once, yes, they have, and we often say this, they say, bad guys can try and try and try and try, and they only have to be right once. I have to be right every time. Well, that's true right here in the protect function. But once they've gotten through my protect function and now we're in detect function, that entire paradigm shifts. Listen to me. Make sure you're paying attention. Here's what I mean. Now they have to be right every time. I only have to be right once. You see where I'm getting at? Because detection, all I need is one opportunity to say, well, that's weird. Why did that PowerShell do that one weird thing? Well, that's weird. Why am I seeing a web inject over from this Word document to something different? Well, that's weird. Why am I seeing this very strange traffic going out to an odd domain we've never seen before? All of those can be just potential signs of, I might want to look into that. You see what I'm getting at? So what detection allows is for us to be in the driver's seat post prevention failure to know something bad has happened and take action. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. And this is why we push some of those things in there. So Dave's saying hackers only have to be right once with their attack. We have to be right most or all of the time to protect. Given the odds in vendor software flaws, detection as a must as it will happen. Exactly right. And then as I was saying, that detection shifts into our favor. I only need one opportunity to see something's bad and potentially know something's happened and take action. Exactly. Love that, Dave. Thank you. Next function is the response function, doing something about it. How many times do we think we're ready and we think we have resiliency and we think we would handle something and then we learn in the aftermath we were not ready? This happens all the time. Oh, I have a BDR. I've got a backup and disaster recovery tool, and it's backing up my files. That'd be good. And then you get smacked with ransomware everywhere, and you go to the BDR vendor, and they say, yeah, the recovery is going to take about 3 to 8 weeks. And you're like, what? And then they say, well, you never told me that every single file for every single one of your clients was going to get popped. That wasn't in, yeah, we can restore a file within 30 seconds, but you never told us about that much data. See what I'm getting at? I'm not hating on BDRs. I'm just saying we have to be prepared for this. And sometimes the way we get prepared is we get punched in the mouth and we have to learn how to recover. Or we actually pretend to be punched in the mouth and try to recover. This is called disaster recovery. This is called disaster recovery testing. This is called tabletop testing. There's a lot you can do around this. Hey, side note for y'all, my good buddy Bob Miller, he's an MSP out of Louisiana. He built a really cool software tool. He's been running it for free for MSPs. It's called IR Games, Incident Response Games. I think it's irgames.ai. And what Bob does is he lets you as an MSP walk through as a tabletop an actual cyber incident. How do we handle it? How do we communicate to our clients when tough decisions come up? How do we handle it? And it will become a great feeder for you to be like, we've never thought about this. We've never thought about that. So yes, it all starts with incident response, writing a plan, but testing that plan, using tabletops and scenarios to run our test through and say, how would it work? So this is why this response is so important. A lot of times we think we're good at this, but we're not. And then lastly is recovery. How do we come back to an acceptable manner? Now, there's something I want to say about recovery, and it's many of you have heard of the words cyber resilience. You've probably heard of that term before. That term comes from NIST actually has a definition for the term cyber resilience. And wouldn't you know it, cyber resilience is the overall umbrella under which cybersecurity exists underneath. Did you know that? And here's something that's neat about cyber resilience. Here's how NIST defines it. I may not get this word for word, but it's just in Wes's brain. It's this: the measure of your organization's ability to recover in the midst of adverse circumstances. Okay, I've just committed this to memory because it's that important. Now, you may have just heard me blurb stuff at you, but let me say what this matters. It's the measure, meaning when I think measure, like I'm measuring a cup of sugar to put into a cake. How much do I need? So it's the measure of your organization's ability to continuously operate in the middle of bad things happening. This is resilience. The idea of resilience is you're not going to stop it, but how do we stay enough active? How do we stay enough capable that something super bad doesn't happen, that we don't have a hard outage? So no one's saying that you're going to be 100% efficient. What we're going for is how do we stay efficient enough? My co-founder, Kyle Christensen, also, he's built multiple MSPs. He jokes all the time. Many of you have heard him say this. He goes, Wes, the real definition for MSP should not be managed service provider. It should be mediocre service provider. He goes, and I don't mean that in a bad way. He said, what I mean by that is we should be just good enough. We should be providing mediocre services. I don't mean mediocre customer experience, but mediocre, we did just enough for what you needed. I'm not trying to go overboard and I'm not trying to do too little. I'm trying to do the right amount. And that's a lot of what recovery is all about, is getting things back up to speed. But how do we know what needs to be brought back up to speed first and second and third and when? Well, this comes into things like not just data backups, but actually preparing for this by doing things like business impact analysis, by testing those things. Maybe a question for y'all in chat. Do you do business impact analysis with your clients? Or do you do BIAs for yourself? If you're not, I would encourage you to do this. The very first time I ever did a BIA was at my bank. And let me tell you, I learned some incredible things. I had assumptions that I thought were in place that I learned were not correct once I started asking the subject matter experts in my bank. Hey, if this system went down, what systems, if this function went down, if our wire function went down, what are the major systems? Who are the key personnel? How long can those systems be down? And I learned things that I had no idea about, that I had to go back and re-architect and have conversations with. I would really encourage you to do and start this activity of BIAs. Okay, so that's kind of a high level of what those major 5 functions are about. And I really look at them as a sliding scale of maturity. I start with identify, I move to protect, then I shift into detect, and then I go into response, and then I go into recovery. And I'll show you why in a minute. But lastly, governance. Governance answers that question of how do we know? It gives us the ability to talk about strategy, our expectations. How do we report this to our overseers, usually our board members, those that are decision makers, making sure that they're bought into the plans and they understand from a risk perspective, we can't do everything, but we should be doing enough to where the decision makers say, we agree. Could we do more? Yes. Should we do more? No, we're going to say this is good enough. So this is what governance answers, and it really gives us that ability. And the other thing that governance brings into light is the key responsibility of our service providers. You have them. Think about this. How many of you have an RMM or an RPA? Those 2 tools are by far some of the most risky things you have in your business. If one of those tools gets popped, bad things happen. So you as an MSP have a third-party provider that is of extreme risk to you, just like the client has an extreme risk, meaning the MSP. So the client is inheriting the risk of not just you, but also even your providers. You see how this works? So we're in a crazy world here. And so governance is trying to get oversight into all of this. Does my MSP care? Are they doing the right things from a governance perspective to secure themselves? Are they doing the right things and the best practices with their third parties to make sure that they're managing this risk well? Do you see how this works? This is why it's so important. Corey checking in and saying it'll definitely, talking about BIAs, it'll definitely give you a wake-up call if you do one. Appreciate that, brother. You're exactly right. Okay, so that's why we introduced governance into the CSF, to add this ability to say, how do we know? How are we discussing it? Are we all on the same page? Because oftentimes we're just not. So if you want an overall view of all the things that go into the NIST CSF, this is all of them. So I just kind of collapsed all of the major categories. Here they are. I'm not going to go through all these because we don't have time, but don't you love how governance talks about our organizational context and start talking about risk management and what level of risk, how do we report on that? What level are we willing to accept and policy and et cetera, et cetera. Isn't this awesome? And then we start to just go right down the line, the things we talked about. So these are each of those major categories. And these are the things that NIST wants you to do. Okay. Now, I want to shift a little bit because I know I probably got about 10 minutes left. And what I really want to do is I want to give you the ability to start thinking through how to start using the NIST CSF in certain ways. First of all, the NIST CSF is a blueprint. We don't make security up. We don't guess at security. We don't just put our finger in the wind and says, well, what sounds good to me today? This is not like a menu that I go to a restaurant and I open it up and say, well, I'll have a little of this and I'll have a little of that. This is much more like a doctor's office where I go in and I say, hey, my knee is hurting and I'm going to go through a practice regimen of specific things to drive towards a diagnosis and ultimate recovery plan for the injury you have. See how this works? That's how we approach security. too often we let our clients dictate this. Well, I don't want to spend that kind of money. I don't need that. And then, oh, okay. Well, sorry, I mentioned it. Yeah, we don't have to do it. So for us, one of the things that matters is we have to have an answer back to the client to say, hey, this is not an option. I'm not asking you to do everything Bank of America is doing, but I'm asking you to follow best practice. I'm asking you to do the things I need you to do. We ourselves are following a best practice called the NIST CSF, or maybe another framework, and it's a best practice. Thousands of people hours have gone into this, and we're following it ourselves, and we're asking you to follow it. We need you to follow best practices. Would you put a, you can give this in so many other examples. Would you build a building without following best practices? Of course not. Would you treat someone from a health perspective without best practices? Of course not. As a CPA, would you follow just what sounds good to you versus following gap practices? Of course not. So best practices come from, or blueprints drive us towards best practices. All right. Next thing that the CSF can be really helpful for is demystifying. Here's what I mean about this. I'm actually going to show you some things. Well, I guess I will in a second. But one of the things that the problems that we have with security today is it's very confusing. Security guy, I'm going to tell you, it's hard. Vendors don't make it any better. We have the latest AI, blockchain threat blocker stopper that stops threats before they happen, and and I'm teasing, but you get the idea. You go from vendor hall to vendor hall and you see these words and you're like, what do the words mean? I'm a security dork. And when I walk through the vendor hall and I come across a vendor and I'm like, I don't know what those words mean. How is anybody else supposed to know what those words mean? Right. And so our clients are even worse. They just look at security as this junk that they don't want to touch, that's nothing but a red line to them, that they don't need it, and they certainly don't understand it. So how do we deal with that? We can't expect them to become a security expert. It's what they're paying us for. Well, I'm going to give you some examples of how we can answer that in a minute. All right. I kind of mentioned the call to authority, this idea of, look, I'm not the one making this up. We're following best practices and we're asking you to do the same thing too. Right? Because we all know as MSPs, we probably hesitate there. We feel the imposter syndrome, don't we? That we didn't come into this world as security experts. We've learned this because we had to, and we just don't always feel like where we want to really be. I get that, right? So that's what's so good about the CSF is it gives us the ability to point to something else and say, don't shoot the messenger. Okay, so now I want to talk about demystifying a little bit more and security gap analysis, because this is really going to help you. Okay. So first of all, you can use the CSF in a lot of ways, obviously to clarify your security program, to communicate it to the client, to identify where the client is currently at according to this best practice. Here's where you're at today, and here's where you need to be, and here's how we can get you there. Here's the budget that it's going to take. Here's the timeline. And hey, in the next quarter, we're going to focus on these 3 most high-risk items. We're going to work on those first, right? We can do all those kinds of things. We can also use this to say, hey, the reason we're a little bit more expensive than $2 Chuck down the street is because we're following best practice and they're not. And I can just tell you at the price that they're wanting to charge you versus us, they can't afford to do the right thing. Isn't that awesome? I'm again pointing to the authority, but we can actually take this even further. How about this? You can actually use the CSF as a journey of security maturity for yourself and your clients. If you start with identify, we can begin to say, this is where security begins. This is where we start at the beginning of the race, identifying what's in our network, and we begin to shift into protection. We then begin to invest in detection, and we then begin to hone in and finish the race with response and recovery. Now, don't look at security as a race or a project that we begin and end. It's more of a process that never ends. But one of the things that Sunil Yu has really given us some insight into is that when we look at the very first 2 functions, identify and protect, they typically tend to be very technology driven. Here's what I mean by this. When we have technology in place, what it does is it lets us automate. Let's say I have a vulnerability scanner in the identify function, or a firewall in the protect function. What those things typically do is when I set them up, I might tweak them a little bit, but largely they operate by themselves. They don't take a lot of people. And so wouldn't you know it, as MSPs, we love those kinds of things, don't we? If you go and look at, and I'll prove this to you in a second, but if you go and look at your security stack today, most of it is in identify and protect. The reason we have less in detect, response, and recovery is because of 2 reasons. 1, it's expensive, and 2, it's very people driven. In fact, I might even just say it's people driven, which makes it more expensive. When you start sliding into more maturity in detection, response, and recovery, your costs go up because people are involved. And when people are involved, costs go up. People are an order of magnitude more expensive than your tools. By the way, this is why we exist as a company. It's not me pitching you, me just saying, why is it for MSPs that we spend all this money keeping our tools up to date and we patch our systems? When's the last time we patched our people? When's the last time we've kept our people up to date? And when our people are not doing the right things, how are we going to do the right things? Doesn't matter about tools. And so this is why detection, response, and recovery get left out from so many MSPs and their clients, is because we just can't afford to roll it out the way we want to roll it out. See how this works? And so this is where I want to get into a little bit more. This is where the cyber defense matrix comes into play. Now, I hope this is all recorded because I know I'm getting close to overwhelming and I want to kind of pull it back, and I'm going to, but I just can't not talk about this piece too, because you go watch the recording again, share this with your team at a lunch and learn, all that kind of stuff. So Sunil knew, so going back to Sunil Yu, he's the one that created this. He knew that this was confusing. He knew that this was hard. And so you know what he did? He actually built a matrix. You're looking at it here. At the very top are the 5 major functions. On the left are the domains, the areas we're trying to protect. And so he said, now what I can do is I can actually start to look at my security tool stack, and I can, and not just like the tools I buy, but could even be things that are just inherently involved, like a, I don't know, like a Microsoft authentication or something. And now what I can do is I can begin to fill in what is where. And I can say, oh, I have some gaps here, or, oh, I have a lot of overlap here, right? So maybe a firewall would exist under the network function, and it's primarily a protect device. So the firewall would be kind of right here. See how this works? So now what you can do is start to actually fill in things to understand where you're at. Well, you know what I did as an experiment? I thought, what happens if I take the NIST CSF, looking at it here, and I add the controls from CIS. And this right here is, look at this. This is CIS implementation group 1. This is the beginner group of CIS. Do you see what I see? Almost all of our attention and resources at the basic level of security falls into identify and protect. There's basically nothing in detect. There is nothing in recover, and response is basically not much there. Isn't that fascinating? So what does this tell us? Remember what we said about the slide of maturity? This right here, we start in identify and protect. This is true. Remember I said I'd prove it to you? This is proof. If you start following the CIS controls, the most basic things that every organization needs to do, notice that most of them are in identify and protect. Watch this. Now, this actually looks like less, but it's way more. So this one right here actually named each of the sub-controls. Now what I did is I've taken all CIS 1, 2, and 3. So implementation groups 1, 2, and 3 from base. Think of it as basic, intermediate, advanced. Think about it that way. And I pushed them onto here. I couldn't write them all out. It's too many words. So I'm only referencing the control. So there's way more here. And notice the same thing. Now we have a lot more in detect. We have a few in recover. We added some in response, but protect is still blown up. You see this? So this is what we're talking about here. Is we have to start understanding when it comes to looking at security, detection, response, and recovery are always going to be less things that we buy and more things that people do. And this costs money. Okay, so we can also use this in a way to report back to the client where they're doing a good job of and where they're maybe not doing a good job of, where they need to make some investments. So this also comes from Sunil. So now I can use this to even report using the CSF as a guidepost and start coming back to the client with, here's some reds we really need to build some resilience in. Next 3 months, we're going to do some work. And I need you to buy in on this because we need to get you to, not expecting us to be greens everywhere, but we definitely don't need reds. We need to be careful where we have yellows. See how this works? Now I can give a roadmap to a client and I can actually show progress in security and investments. I'm going to give you the slides. So you're welcome to screenshot this, but happy to give you the slides too. Andrew Zuccoli, who's an MSP, good friend of mine, walked up to me one day at a big conference. He said, Wes, can I show this to you? I said, sure. I've never seen anything like this. What he did was he took the NIST CSF, he took all the controls his MSP had in place, and he overlaid them into the cyber defense matrix. And what do you see here? One of the things you see is, again, just like what you see here, most of the things his MSP does are around identify and protect. And he actually uses this in sales conversations to say, hey, Miss Client, one of the things that you're paying us for is to keep you left of this red line. This red line right here is the demarc line between staying in good health and then going to where the world goes bad, where we have an incident. This red line is the demarcation, and we want to stay over on this side here, okay? And so what he'd explain to them is this. He'd say, first of all, one of the things you got to know is that we are really trying to focus more than anything on specifically staying on that side. And we have a lot of tools to keep you there, but at some point you're going to go right. And then one of the things that he would also talk to the client about is this. He would say, also, do you notice that not only as we start to slide right, are there fewer tools here? There's just fewer things that exist compared to over here. He said, do you also notice that when we're starting to do things on these left two functions, they're pretty cheap. But when we start sliding past that red line and we go into detection, response, and recover, you see how all of those start getting way more expensive? And the client's like, yeah. And he says, that's because people are expensive, way more expensive than tools. And one of the things that we do to offset that, you're actually going to see this over and over and over, is he says, we actually mandate that you have cyber insurance because they're going to come in as a stopgap. We don't have time to talk about that today, but you see where I'm getting at from this? That's why all of this matters so much. I have no idea how to clear my annotations. I thought they were going to clear with the last slide, and there we go, clear all drawings. Okay, so last couple things I just want to throw at you quickly. NIST realizes that they still struggle from the CSF perspective of people ask them, where do I start? Where do I focus on the most? I only have limited resources. You gave me the big thing that works for Bank of America, but I'm, Main Street USA. What should I focus on? Well, enter the CPGs. If you haven't seen the CPGs before, cybersecurity performance goals, what these are is these let us, let me close this here. There we go. These let us really focus on what are some of the common sets of protections we all need to focus on. Give me some feedback in chat, a yes or no. Do you use the CPGs? I'd love to know if you do or don't. So CISA has released these, and it's a really great focus to say of everything in the big CSF, these are the things that probably matter most. These are the things that they'll even show has high impact, low effort, medium effort, high, all of that. And so really encourage you to use those. Look those up. Google just CISA CPGs. They'll come right up. They align off of this NIST cybersecurity framework, and is a really helpful way for you to start looking at this. And you can even use it to benchmark. You can even use it in client-facing material to say, this is what we're going to start with, and this is how we're going to start building some of this out. We're going for the most impact first. So your investment is going really well for us. Okay, cool. So a lot of no's across this. So there you go. Go check out the cybersecurity performance goals. They're awesome, and they will truly help you out quite a bit. Okay, organizational profiles. How many of you guys have heard of these? So one of the things about organizational profiles, what's neat about these is they let us start to say, okay, this is where we're at today. This is where we want to go. In other words, the gap. So we say, this is where we're at now. This is the target of where we really want to be. So now we have a gap, and now we can address the gap. One of the things I've learned about decision makers, they love gaps, not because they want to have the gap, but they don't want them. And when you show them a gap, and we say, hey, all your peers are actually over here, you're kind of right here, we need to probably do some work. They're going to say, okay, let's do it. We can't be that far off. You also can use this to say, hey, remember we've been investing and trying to get to this level? We're now there. And because we're there, we're in a great spot. And I just want you to see there's value. What you've been paying me for all these years, this is why you're paying me, because we're getting that capability. You've seen return on investment from the things you've been wanting to invest in. So check out the CSF organizational profiles. It really lets you determine your true north and lets you work on it from there. And then I think the last thing I wanted to talk about was the quick start guide. This also is really helpful. It kind of aligns in with CPGs. Again, a lot of us just say, look, I'm a small company. I'm not going to do all the big things. Tell me the minimum. How often you've heard people say that? And I think that's a reasonable ask. What is the minimum? So check this out. You can see it here. NIST CSF version 2.0, small business quick start guide. Give me some feedback in chat. Has anyone read this, and is anyone using it? If you haven't, you really should. It is a fantastic document and really lets you focus on the most important things first so that you're not spending a ton of time going after things that maybe are valuable, but less valuable compared to other things. Again, it gives you the roadmap, it gives you the treasure hunt where the X marks the spot and lets you focus on the things that let you get to the X. Okay. So there you are. I hope that was helpful as I'm going to hit discard on my annotations. There we go. Hopefully that was helpful to you and just an exposure into what NIST CSF is, how to start thinking about it. If I were you, I would pick up the quick start guides. I'd start looking at the CPGs, and then I'd start to build my plan. And there's nothing, I'm going to answer this because it's going to get asked. Are there tools that help this? Of course there are. But don't rush to a tool until you've built the knowledge necessary. When you've built the knowledge necessary, then you find a tool to help you do what you're trying to do. An example of this is, I don't know how to put a roof on a house. I'm not going to rush to go buy a nail gun because all I'm going to do is stick a nail in my knee, right? So think about that perspective. Tools are great, but tools come in after we've really built the knowledge and resilience. Mark, what'd you think? Any questions?
Now, this is great. I love how you can boil down a ton of information in what, 52 minutes. And it makes so much sense. And like a lot of the other stuff, not even the NIST related stuff, like the CISA CPGs, I know they exist, but I can't say that I've actually gone and looked at them. There's just so much out there. And for you to be able to kind of point people in the right direction to get the information they need. The small business guide, just don't just pick out the NIST publication and try to think you're going to really consume that in a way that's going to make sense. Look at some things that boil it down, and you've done such a great job here doing that. So do we have any question? Let's see. So there was a comment earlier, Steve. I know you made a comment about the AI thing. This is something I just saw this yesterday, so I can't speak intelligently about it. There's some directives that came out of the White House regarding AI. How it's people have to put 100% into it. There's this discussion about high impact AI being high risk. We need to make sure that we protect that. But other than that, and what impact it's going to have on MSPs, I haven't had a chance to boil it down. I think one of them was 25 pages. The other one is not quite as long, but definitely look into that. What the White House guidance on AI is, and how that might impact your business. But yeah, so anything else came up?
The only thing I'll add to that too is, yeah, I'm aware of the AI guidance. I'm super glad it came out. We desperately need it. We're in an arms race. Well, I think arms race is far too much to say. We're in a perceived arms race. And there's too much to say about that right now, but we're in you look at Gartner, sort of like we're in the trough, we're hitting that peak time. We're going to hit that trough of disillusion, whatever, that we're starting to get close to that. I don't want to call it an AI bubble, but there's so much in front of us. We're wondering what's real, what's not. And we're rushing off to go pick, how do I run Copilot in my business? And then I forgot to do the right things on the front of it. Now Copilot's reading up all my data, including salary data. And any employee can come in and say, how much does Mark Jennings make? And now I can see, like, whoops, we didn't know it would do that. Right. So this is, again, cart and horse. And I love that they produce the guidance. The other thing I would say about the OMB directives, just be aware, just high level, regulators now know what an MSP is. They know who you are. They know why you matter. And not just the regulators, but even just CISA and others that have a mission to help secure the United States and other countries very similar. They now know what an MSP is. They know who you are. And so I don't think that's a bad thing. It just means you're in the crosshairs and they're starting to systemically know who you are and why you matter.
Yeah, yeah. So no, this is great. Just looking to see if there's any other questions. Has anybody added anything? Uh, Blog pages. Oh yeah. So I'm gonna do a little bit about NSITSP to wrap this up and let you know some of the resources that we have. Okay, yeah. And yeah, Wes, a little bit about empath. I mean, we're all trying to bring our teams up. Again, I'm happy to be working with you on empath. But why don't you give us a little bit about empath?
Sure. Yeah. And definitely didn't want to do any pitch at all, but happy to just give you a peek at it. And we can talk more later if you want to know more. But high level of empath is for MSPs, when you hire, you're not normally hiring from Bank of America or, NSA or, Microsoft. You hire from Best Buy, the Ford dealership, places like that. And you're like, welcome to my MSP, whether it's tier one, it's VCIO, it's account management, if it's security analyst, whatever. We have them get started in a role they're not prepared for. Right. And for us, we say, well, come on in and follow me around and ask good questions and go check IT glue and hope you can figure this thing out. And at some point, I'm going to be the mother bird. I'm going to push you out of the nest. And what Empath really is it's a platform that lets you build training, that lets you establish it. We bring pre-built training in left and right. Mark is actually one of our, when we call them navigators, our educators. And then you can actually build your own. And it can connect in with other systems and bring knowledge in. And so the goal for that is to help you establish your way. And Tom, thank you for chatting. Tom is a partner of ours and super very active inside the platform too. So yeah, that's kind of what we are. Empath MSP, check it out. Happy to show you more if anyone wants to know more.
Yeah, no, I can highly recommend it. And again, you may see yours truly on there.
Yep.
All right. So great. Let's I think that's it for questions. Let me just wrap up with a couple of things about NSITSP. So I'm going to share out my screen to show you a couple more slides here. So if you're interested in becoming a member, you can just basically go to nsitsp.org/join. And you can look at the events. Like this is an example of an event. We have upcoming events, and there are also recorded events for members to go back and view. And if you still don't know enough about NSITSP, you can join us next month when we, or this month actually, April 30th, when we do Unlocking Success, Why Joining NSITSP Transforms Your IT Business. So get involved. We're involved in legal aspects, the legislatures, all these laws that potentially are coming down the pike. We want to get involved in that. Marketing your MSP, all kinds of good webinars we present on a regular basis. So please look at joining NSITSP. It's a great resource. And if you want to know more about it, we also have a Q2 all members meeting. We do these quarterly. They're open to the public. Anybody can join. You can ask questions. You can basically, come in, see what we're doing, and find out more about it. Hopefully, you'll want to join as well after that. And finally, there's more. Join us next month when we have CISA. We talked a lot about CISA in this presentation. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency will be presenting next month. And again, they, especially with the AI directives and things like that, they're going to have a lot to share. So we're going to have them on board on Wednesday, May 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So please join us for that. And with that, I'm going to thank you all for joining us. Wes, it's been a pleasure again. You're such a great presenter. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. I loved it. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.